Like the UK, the European Union is grappling with its own proposed crypto regulations. Lawmakers there are set to vote on a proposal that requires exchanges to hold information regarding people transferring cryptocurrencies.
I don't trust the currency as a long-term store of value, A, and I don't trust my assets to not be seized. If you're a rational investor, you have to stampede to property, and now the debate is just what's the most desirable property? Is it land? Is it art? Is it sports teams? Is it gold? Is it Bitcoin? Is it some other crypto? Have you invented coal fusion, in the next Tesla, and are you going to buy that? And so that's the investor attitude. I don't see there's no political conviction or will or any likelihood that we're going to stop the expansion of the money supply. Do you want to be long property? Which property? And of course, my attitude would be you should be leveraged long property in an inflationary environment. You want to be short the dollar. By the way, you want to be short the dollar because it's like negative 15% real yield, but I even more like to be short the peso, which is probably a negative 35% real yield. So you want to be short a weak fiat currency via debt. And then you want to be long a property, ideally a non-sovereign store of value. Or if you're going to hold property in a nation, hopefully you either own the country or you trust the country. How valuable is $1 billion of real estate in Moscow right now, right, to anybody in the Western European region? We know that all these currencies are weakening, right? Every Eastern European currency is weakening. The yen is weakening against the dollar. I mean, everybody is weakening, and the dollar is losing 20% of its value. So I think the macro environment says I got to find an inflation hedge. The political environment, on one hand, is a massive endorsement for digital assets by the White House last week when President Biden said 40 million Americans need digital assets, and we're going to embrace this. And I think a massive advertisement for Bitcoin with the Ukrainian-Russian war, and especially the sanctions, where we seized $300 billion worth of treasury assets from the Russians. I think the Chinese have $3 trillion worth of assets, and that might have got their attention. And probably pretty much, if you're any nation state in the world and you think you might ever be in conflict with another nation state, and you're holding their credit derivatives or their currency derivatives or their currency or gold in one of their banks, that's not really proper anymore. So I think that's got everybody scratching their head saying, I don't trust the currency as a long-term store of value, A, and I don't trust my assets to not be seized. Well, I mean, it seems to me that it's pretty obvious there's $100 trillion worth of monetary energy or wealth that would be better served to be sitting in a synthetic digital asset like Bitcoin than to be sitting in real estate or gold or equities that are currency derivatives or other kinds of weak currencies. So you got 100x opportunity or addressable market from here even without considering inflation. By the time we get there, it'll probably be 200x. So I don't think we're too early. I think we're 1-2% into it if you look at it weighted. If you're an institutional investor, the first 10 years of a crypto network, you probably have to just sit and stare and see if it's going to break. So it was engineered, January 3rd, 2009, but you had to wait until about 2020 before you were sure it wasn't going to be hacked, banned, broken, copied. And so I think 10 years later, it starts to become interesting. We're year 2 of institutional adoption, right? Year 1 maybe started with MicroStrategy, bought $250 million of Bitcoin in August of 2020, and that runs about a year. Like we're 18 months into our journey here. So you're in the middle of year 2 of institutional adoption. There's 10 years of education, and in those 10 years, what happens at the end of year 1, well, Elon Musk gets involved, and then all of a sudden there's 24 Bitcoin miners that are publicly traded vehicles about now. There's another dozen companies probably come public. So you're watching the institutionalization of the asset class. We're waiting for guidance from the SEC, the FDIC. The executive order from the White House last week was a massive milestone. Biden's election was a massive milestone, but the executive order was a double massive milestone because that directed 18 agencies to figure this out. That'll be 24 months. By the end of the first Biden administration, I think we have 80% of the regulatory clarity that you need to understand this. That means that from the year 2024 to the year 2028, 80% has been figured out. And by the year 2030, maybe 90% has been figured out. And at that point, I think it's just kind of like a growth industry. I mean, it'll be a nice growth industry, 2030 to 2040. But right now we're in hyper growth, early stage, lots of questions, lots of people don't understand it. This is the stage. It's like 2011 Google stock or 2011 Amazon or Apple or Facebook. Just at the stage where it's kind of unstoppable, it's necessary. A reasonable objective person would say Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, they were all useful and necessary in the year 2012. And yet only 95% of the people were underallocated. And then those things worked for the next 8 to 10 years. And then by the year 2021, every 21-year-old Uber driver, if you asked him, would have said, oh yeah, I own Facebook stock or I own Amazon stock, or they get in debates about whether Google's better than, Apple, and it's not really it's not that high growth stage anymore. It's that maturing, dominant monopoly stage. If Tesla did it, like if Tesla had gone and bought $10 billion or $20 billion worth of Bitcoin, it'd be worth $100 billion right now, right? What would happen to Bitcoin if Apple said, we're going to basically sweep all of our Apple cash flows into Bitcoin? Okay, well, Bitcoin would go up by a factor of 4. Apple would end up making $500 billion. Their stock would go up by $1 trillion. So anybody can do this at any scale. But now what happens if the Emiratis do it or the Saudis do it? It would be worth $1 trillion to them if they adopted as a reserve asset where they sweep their treasury reserves into this hard asset. Currencies are going to be the province of nation states, and that's always going to be political. But what you can't dispute is if you've exported $100 billion worth of products, services, or commodities for your country, and if you trade that for Argentine pesos or bolivars, it's pretty obvious, right? You exported $100 billion worth of good stuff and you end up with $100 billion of paper going to zero. Perfect example, if you're sitting in any country with a weakening, collapsing currency, whether it's Turkey or Syria or Argentina or Venezuela or fill in the blank, it's hopeless unless you take a risk. Dan, my last point I make is there's a very conventional view, like equities are conventional stores of value. Well, equities aren't stores of value in Venezuela. Equities aren't stores of value right now in Russia. If the currency collapses or if the counterparty is not trustworthy, then the equity is not a store of value. And in this case, if you're going to hold an equity, I would say, I would rather in this environment own a stock like Disney that owned the intellectual property rights to every cultural icon in the Western world. Intellectual property, as opposed, or I'd rather own a company that owned 1,000 Picassos and Leonardo da Vinci paintings because they're property backed, or I'd rather own a company that owned $1 billion of gold. I think there's a battle between East and West, and there's a battle between the fundamentalists and the traders, the hodlers and the traders. The hodlers have spent 100 hours studying this. They've concluded this is engineered perfect property or perfect money. They've got a 10-year to 100-year time horizon. They're going to hold it as generational wealth transfer. The traders think it's a risk-on asset, and they're thinking that I'm going to short it to hedge out my NASDAQ position. And they haven't spent 100 hours thinking about it or studying it. They're just fast money. So over the near term, the traders win, but over the long term, the hodlers win. And then in the East versus the West, if you're, Manhattan, Upper East Side, and you've got a lot of money in the stock market, you feel very comfortable, you like your life. This means different things for different people, right? If you live outside the US, this is a lifeboat. It may save your life. It'll keep you from being impoverished or murdered or left destitute or starving, right? But if you're in the US, you're either an intellectual hodler and you get it, or you're a fast money trader. And every month that goes by, there are fewer and fewer traders, there are more and more hodlers. And the variable here is education. We are educating the masses on what this is. And if you think it's a speculative asset, you know, when you use words like it's just a crypto thing, if you're using crypto, that means you really don't understand it, because nobody describes Bitcoin as crypto anything. When you say Bitcoin, it says, oh, I might understand it. And I think this is really just a process of maturing of the asset class. And in the near term, you know, I joke, it's kind of good to have the fast money traders, because I need someone to sell it to me, right? Otherwise, nobody would sell it to me. Once they're all educated, nobody's going to sell this stuff. They're going to hold it forever. And then you're going to have to pay 10x more money to buy it.